Chapter 11 of Blackbeard, Buccaneer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carlos Recio. Titled by Ralph D. Paine. Chapter 11. Jack Journeys Afoot. It is often said that a thing is not lost if you know where it is. This was Jack Cockrell's opinion concerning that weighty sea chest which had splashed to the bottom of the sluggish stream in the heart of the Cherokee swamp. With young Bill Saxby and eager old Trimble Rogers, he hastened from the grave of the pirate seaman whom they had buried on the knoll and fetched up at the shore where the pirogue had been left. Beside it floated Blackbeard's boat filled with water. Having cut 2 or 3 long poles, they sounded the depth and prodded in the muddy bed to find the treasure chest. It had sunk no more than 8 feet below the surface as the tide then stood, which was not much over the head of a tall man. The end of a pole struck something solid, after considerable poking about. It was not rough, like a sunken log, and further investigation with the poles convinced them that they were thumping the lid of the chest. "Do you suppose you could muster breath to dive and bend a line to one of the handles, Master Cockrell?" suggested Trimble Rogers. "Here's a coil of stout stuff in Captain Teach's boat, what he used for a painter." "The bottom of the creek is too befouled," promptly objected Jack, "and I confess it daunts me to think of meeting that drowned corpse down there. Try it yourself if you like." "I'd be needed above water to handle the musket if Blackbeard sneaks back to bang at us with his pistols," was the evasive reply. The mention of the corpse had given old Trimble a distaste for the task. To his petulant question, Bill Saxby protested that he couldn't swim a blessed stroke, and he sensibly added, "What if you did get a rope's end belayed to a handle of the chest? Even if the strain didn't part the line, we couldn't heave away in this tipsy canoe, and I'm blamed certain we can't drag the chest ashore, lacking perches and tackles." "The smell of treasure warps my judgment," grumpily confessed Trimble Rogers. "We ain't properly rigged to hiss that chest from where she lays, and that's the fact." "Give us a gear, and we'd have it out and cracked open as pretty as you please," said Bill. "Set up a couple of spars for shears, stay in from the bank, rig double blocks, and grappling irons for a diver to work with." "Which is exactly what Captain Teach will be doing of when he finds his ship again," lamented the Buccaneer. "He will be some time finding his ship afoot," grimly chuckled Bill. "We have naught to smash his boat with, but we'll just take it along with us." "If we make haste to report to Captain Stede Bonnet," spoke up Jack Cockrell, "he may make sail in time to give Blackbeard other things to think on than this treasure chest, and it is my notion that the need of fitting the Revenge for action is too urgent to spare a crew to attempt this errand." "We shall have it yet," cried Trimble, much consoled, "and Stede Bonnet'll blithely furnish the men and gear. For a mere babe, Master Cockrell, you'll eke wisdom like a colander. Our duty is to tarry no longer at this mad business." "The first sound word I've heard out of the old barnacle, eh, Jack?" said Bill Saxby. "You must be out of the swamp by night, and laying a course for Captain Bonnet and the Royal James. Whilst you empty Blackbeard's boat of water so we can tow it, let me make a route chart," was Jack's happy idea. "Some mishap or other may overtake us here, we'd get the chance to seek the treasure again, and our memory of this pest hole of a swamp may trick us." Bill Saxby's tattered diary supplied a scrap of paper, and Jack dug charred splinters from the inside of the canoe which enabled him to draw a charcoal sketch or map. It traced a smaller stream from the fork where it had branched off, the stretch in which it widened like a tiny lagoon or bayou, and the point of shore just beyond which the pirogue had unexpectedly rammed Blackbeard's boat. A cross designated the spot where the treasure chest had sunk in 8 feet of water. The knoll and the grave of seaman Jesse Strawn were also indicated, with the distance estimated in paces and the bearings set down by the position of the sun. "There," said Jack, well pleased with his handiwork, "and once we are aboard ship, I can make fair copies on parchment, one for each of us." "Thank ye, lad," gratefully exclaimed Trimble Rogers, who now had something to live for. "'Twas a fond dream of mine when I sailed with the great Captain Edward Davis in the South Sea, some day to blink at a chart what showed where the gold was hid." They were, indeed, recovered from the intoxication of treasure and recalled to realizing the obligation that was upon them. They had swerved from it, but now they pressed forward to finish the appointed journey. The canoe moved down to the fork of the waters, with the light cockboat skittering in its wake, and perhaps the unhappy Blackbeard, stranded in the swamp, hurled after them a volley of those curses for which he was renowned. Once Jack Cockrell laughed aloud, explaining to his laboring comrades, "Captain Teach will be combing the burrs from his grand beard when he boards his ship again. He may get hung by the chin in a thicket." "He's sure to spend this night in the swamp, blast him," earnestly observed Bill. "And the mosquitoes will riddle his hide." "And may Jesse Strawn lose no time in haunting him," said Trimble Rogers. There was an hour of daylight to spare when they had ascended the larger creek as far as the canoe could be paddled. There they disembarked and hid the dugout and the cockboat in the overhanging bushes where they could be found again in case of a forced retreat. Bill and Jack burdened themselves with the sack of food and the water jug, while the old Buccaneer set out in the lead as a guide. It was irksome progress for a time, but gradually the ground became drier and the foliage was more open. Dusk found them safely emerged from the great Cherokee swamp and in a pleasant forest of long-leaf pine with a carpet of brown needles. In fear of Indians, they dared not kindle a fire, and so stretched themselves in their wet and muddy rags and slept like dead men. What awakened Jack Cockrell before sunrise was a series of groans from Trimble Rogers, who sat with his back against a tree while he rubbed his legs. Ashamed at being heard, he grumpily explained, "Cord and a bundle of sticks should torment me no worse than this hell-begotten rheumatism. I be free of it in a ship, but the land reeks with foul vapors. It hurt me cruel at Cartagena in the year of—" "But you can walk all day in such misery as that?" anxiously interrupted Jack. "If not, I'll make a shift to crawl," said the old sea-dog. It was apparent to Jack, and also to Bill Saxby, that the ordeal of the swamp had crippled their companion, whose bodily strength had been overtaxed. They debated whether to try to return to the coast and risk a voyage in the canoe, but Trimble Rogers swore by all the saints in the calendar that he was done with the pestilent swamp. He would push on in spite of the rheumatism. His hardy spirit was unbroken. And so they resumed the march, the suffering Buccaneer hobbling with the musket as a staff or with a strong arm supporting him. Halts were frequent and progress very slow. Now and then they had glimpses of the blue sea, and so knew that they held the course true. It had been reckoned that 2 days would suffice to bring them to the bay in which Stede Bonnet's ship was anchored. By noon of this first day, however, it was plainly evident that Trimble Rogers was done for. He uttered no complaints and withheld the groans behind his set teeth, but his lank body was a-tremble with pain and fatigue. Whenever he sank down to rest, they had to raise him up and set him on his legs again before he could totter a little way farther. "What say, Jack, to slinging him on a pole, neck and heels?" suggested Bill Saxby. "Can we make him fast with our belts? And choke him to death? In Charlestown I saw Captain Bonnet's pirates carry their wounded in litters woven of boughs." The suffering Trimble put a stop to this by shouting, "Avast with the maundering nonsense! Push on, lads, and leave this old hulk to be. Many a goodly man have I seen drop in the jungle. What matters it? Speed ye to Captain Bonnet." "Here's one pirate that won't desert a shipmate," declared Bill Saxby. "And how can we push on without you, old Truepenny, to lay your nose to the trail? I took no heed of the marks and landfalls." "Like a sailor ashore, mouth open and eyes shut," rasped the Buccaneer of Hispaniola. "Methinks I might find my way in this Carolina country," ventured Jack Cockrell. "It would be easier for a landsman like myself than for Bill, who is city-bred and a seaman besides." "More wisdom from the stripling," said Trimble. "Willing as I be to die sooner than delay ye, and so vex Stede Bonnet, it should please me to live to overhaul that sea-chest of Blackbeard's." "I'll stand by this condemned old relic," amiably agreed Bill Saxby. "Do you request Captain Bonnet to send a party to salvage us, Jack?" "He will take pleasure in it, Bill. Before I go, let me help you find shelter, dry limbs for props, and a thatch of palmetto leaves." "Take no thought of us," urged Trimble. "Trust me to set this lazy oaf to work. Now listen, Jack, and carefully. Captain Bonnet's ship waits in the Cape Fear River, 12 leagues to the northward of us. You will find her betwixt the bay of the mainland and a big-sized island where the river makes in from the sea. There will be a lookout kept, and I can tell ye where to meet a boat." With a memory as retentive as a printed page, the keen-eyed old wanderer described the landscape league by league, the streams and their direction, the hills which were prominent, the broad stretches of savanna or grassy meadow, the belts of pine forest, the tongues of swamp which had to be avoided. Jack was compelled to repeat the detailed instructions over and over, and he was a far more studious pupil than when stuffy Parson Throckmorton had rapped his knuckles and fired him with rebellious dreams of piracy. At length the Buccaneer was willing to acknowledge, "Unless an Indian drive an arrow through the lad's brisket, Bill, I can trust him to find our ship. Best give him the musket." "Me shoulder that carronade and trudge a dozen leagues?" objected Jack. "I travel light, and leave the ordnance with you." They insisted on his taking more than a third of the food, but he refused to deprive them of the water jug. There would be streams enough to slake his thirst. It was an affectionate parting. Bill Saxby's innocent blue eyes were suffused, and his chubby face sorrowful at the thought that they might not meet again. Trimble Rogers fished out his battered little Bible and quoted a few verses, as appeared to be his habit on all solemn occasions. Jack Cockrell knew him well enough by now to find it not incongruous. Among this vanishing race of sea fighters had been many a hero of the most fervent piety. Their spirit was akin to that of Francis Drake, who summoned his crew to prayers before he cleared for action. And in this wise did Master Jack Cockrell set out to bear a message from comrades in dire distress. Moreover, in his hands were the lives of Joe Hawkridge and those other marooned seamen, as he had every reason to believe. It was a grave responsibility to be thrust upon a raw lad in his teens, who had been so carefully nurtured by his fretful guardian of an uncle, Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes. Jack thought of this and said to himself, with a smile, "A few weeks gone, and I was locked in my room without any dinner for loitering with Stede Bonnet's pirates at the Charlestown Tavern. My education has been swift since then." He was expectant of meeting no end of peril and hardship, and he fought down a sense of dread that was not to his discredit. But it was so decreed that he should pass secure and unmolested. At first he went too fast, without husbanding his strength, and loped along like a hound whenever the country was clear of brushwood. This wore him down, and he failed to watch carefully enough for his landmarks. Toward the end of the day he became confused because he could not discern the sea even by climbing a tree. But he tried to keep bearing to the northeast until the sun went down. Afraid of losing himself entirely, and ignorant of the lay of the land by night, he made his bivouac in a grove of sycamore saplings and imagined Indians were creeping up whenever the leaves rustled. This fear of roaming savages troubled him next day as he wearily trudged through this primeval wilderness unknown to white settlers. It spurred him on, despite his foot-sore fatigue, and he was making the journey more rapidly than old Trimble Rogers, for all his cunning woodcraft, had been able to accomplish it. Almost at the end of his endurance, the plucky lad discerned the sheen of a broad water in the twilight, and so came to the Cape Fear River. He had worried greatly lest he might have veered too far inland, but there was the wooded bay and the foreland crowned with dead pines which had been swept by forest fire, and out beyond it was the island, of the size and shape described by Trimble Rogers, making a harbour from the sea which rolled to the horizon rim. But no tall brig, nor any other vessel, rode at anchor in this silent and lonely haven. Jack had been told precisely where to look for it. He had made no mistake. Some emergency had caused Captain Stede Bonnet to make sail and away. A king's ship or some other hostile force might have compelled him to slip his cable in haste, reflected Jack, as he descended to the shore of the bay. It was most unlike the chivalrous Stede Bonnet to abandon two of his faithful seamen without an effort to succour them. Endeavouring to comfort himself with this surmise, the sorely disappointed boy paced the sand far into the night, and gazed in vain for the glimmer of a fire or the spark of a signal lantern in a ship's rigging. He could not bear to think of the dark prospect should no help betide him. Some time before day he was between waking and sleeping, when a queer delusion distracted him. Humming in his ears was the refrain of a song which was both familiar and hauntingly pleasant. It seemed to charm away his poignant anxieties, to lull him with a feeling of safety. He wondered if his troublesome adventures had made him light-hearted. He moved not a muscle, but listened to this phantom music, and noted that it sounded louder and clearer instead of fading away, and still he refused to believe that it was anything more than a drowsy mockery. At length a vagrant breeze brought him a snatch of this enjoyable chorus in deeper, stronger volume, and he leaped to his feet with a shout. It was no hallucination. Lusty seamen were singing in time to the beat of their oars, and Jack Cockrell knew it for the favourite song of Stede Bonnet's crew. He could distinguish the words as they rolled them out in buoyant Stertonian harmony. "And when my precious leg was lopped, just for a bit of fun, I picks it up on t'other hopped, and rammed it in a gun. What's that for?" cries out Ginger Dick. "What for, my jumping beau?" "Why, to give the lubbers one more kick, yo-ho with the rum below." End of chapter 11.